Hi. Replit's a company where we believe in the future and the intrepid developer and programs and software that are revolutionary as well as evolutionary. We would like to introduce to you the third episode of Evolution at Replit, brought to you by Hacker Pro. Hi, I'm Jesse. I'm here with Lincoln.
Hi.
Lincoln, what do you do at Replit?
I'm a infrastructure engineer. I'm on the platform team, and we just make the platform run.
So
Just everything related to that.
If you haven't heard, people might know front end, back end. What's the difference between back end and platform?
Yeah, so the product team is the other main engineering team at Replit.
Yeah.
They are both front end and back end. And then infrastructure is more about, or platform, I should say, is more about scheduling and running user code.
So I brought you in to talk about kind of a feature you launched from ideation to implementation. So I think you wanted to talk about search today. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's probably the easiest one to talk about.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess we could just kind of jump in and you could show me. I guess we could talk first about what we had before and then where we are now. We could just do the full.
So kind of how this feature came to be.
Yeah. What was the original problem? Like we have an IDE. We have you could publish things via REPLs. You could publish REPLs. We have the community feature. It's how do you discover them? That
was an issue? Yeah. So this was during Hack Week of 2022.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think just every website kind of has content, right? And you need some way to find stuff.
Yeah.
So community was one aspect. We needed community had a search, but you couldn't search all the REPLs that existed. Only a small number of REPLs are actually posted to community. So if you wanted to find Wordle was really popular around the time we were building this. So if you wanted to find a Wordle REPL, you just have to use Google, right?
Yeah.
You'd say replit.com Wordle, and that would maybe pull up some stuff that had Wordle in the title.
Or maybe word of mouth or Discord or some other avenue.
Some other way. People are going off platform to do searches, and so we just brought that on platform. I think we did view it as primarily a social feature. The vision from the beginning was also that it would be a really good code search.
Yeah.
That particular part of the problem turned out to be very large, just because we have an extremely large quantity of code files.
Let's hear some numbers. Let's blow the people's minds of
well, if you're sharing this externally, you'll have to vet what we're allowed to share.
Yeah, we'll
leave it out.
I'll throw it to legal.
At the time that I was building this was a year ago, so it's probably much higher now.
Yeah.
But the numbers were something like 100 million REPLs.
Yeah.
Each of which had roughly 10 files. So a billion files to search through.
And you're indexing every line of code, every file name.
That was the idea at the beginning. We couldn't quite make that happen in our first sprint, and so we cut back on the code search aspect of it. But now I believe, now that we've hired out the data infra team a little bit more, they've in just the last month or so, I'm pretty sure Mohammed has implemented that pipeline that will search over everything.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But it wasn't so huge. It was
that's
well,
what's the comparison?
Of good code, a lot of that's node modules and stuff like that, which you can use some heuristics to filter out that stuff. I want to say 10 terabytes or something like that, which sounds small actually when you say it like that, but we're dealing with an Elasticsearch cluster we hadn't run before.
There is always a bigger fish, right?
And we had no data pipelines, essentially. I rewrote the data pipelines for this 5 different times because, I had this small thing working on my VM, and then I had a slightly bigger version, and then a slightly bigger version, and I realized, okay, we want to build something that's really going to scale. So we ended up redoing it a bunch of times. But so you can see it on my screen. This is pretty much
Yeah.
the version that we launched, right? So you can search over REPLs, you can search over templates, code, people, community, docs,
Mhm.
and tags. So I'll just do a search for like Wordle because that was a big one, right? So
Yeah.
you can see now there's how many results? 150,000 Wordle results. There's fuzzy search in here. So if I do exact match, there's only 36,000 Wordle REPLs.
Gotcha.
Which is an enormous number of Wordle REPLs. But
It's
everyone wants to make their own version of it.
and how many of these like if you fork it, it's going to come up again, right? So these aren't like
True. Yeah.
these aren't 36
So we
totally
prioritize-
independent.
This was another one of the challenges we faced was like, there are different aspects that users care about when you're
Yeah.
searching for something. One of them is you want the original. You don't want to do the forked version.
Yep.
And so we relied on some community heuristics. If I click on this first one, you can see it showed up as the top one because it has a lot of runs, it has a lot of forks, and that sort of thing. There's
some secret sauce of how to rank higher, just like
like tweaking those parameters was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
You can see if we go down here, there's actually the third result has fewer hearts and fewer runs, but more comments, and perhaps it has a better match for some other reason. So why getting those parameters exactly right? I don't know that we have it exactly right, but we came up with something that usually gave you what you want.
Yeah. How far away do you think this is from like being what you imagine like our full potential?
I think it's pretty close. I think the question is whether this code search works or not. I think it does. It looks like it's working, but I don't know. So the corner we had to cut during the pod that we were, not too happy about, but had to be done was to ship on time. Was we weren't going to search over all files in all REPLs. We were only going to search over the files in published REPLs that have been published to the community. And so the main thing we were wanting was all files, and especially one thing that users really wanted when we were speaking to them as we were building this was they wanted to be able to search over their own code, which I believe you can do now.
Which is huge.
I mean it's like
because it's every REPL that you have.
Every REPL you've ever made, every file in every REPL you can search, and yeah.
Well, that's actually interesting. As a contrast, maybe you could talk about like, did you have any competitors in mind when you're thinking about like, of course, like GitHub comes to mind, or like what do you see, or what did you see before maybe demo day or the 6 weeks that you're like, we need to be at least as good as X.
Right. Yeah, that's something I think about a lot. Not necessarily competitors, but like what's out there and what we're building. Users have certain expectations. So what are they expecting, and how can we meet it? I think actually on the topic of how this could be better, and this is related to that, is this is not really a code search. It's a text search.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be amazing if I could search for like programming symbols, right? Like parentheses and brackets and quotation marks and stuff like that. Our Elasticsearch engine will strip all of that out.
Gotcha.
So that's a little bit of a bummer, but that's actually an extremely difficult problem, and there wasn't something off the shelf or an open source library that we could use and bet on that would actually solve this problem. So
let's get in the weeds a little bit then. What's something that you think other more technically minded people who may have dabbled in search, or at least tried to optimize a page for SEO, what do you think a good example of like a more technical problem that it took you to build this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I've kind of mentioned a few times, we use Elasticsearch for this.
Yeah.
I think that most of the interesting technical problems are probably already solved by Elasticsearch in this particular space. I think if for the kind of thing you're talking about, it would be really interesting to build our own, but we just have to resist that temptation sometimes, because that put us in a room for 6 months and we could maybe come up with something pretty good, but then the world has moved on. So we really just need to get something out there. Maybe one day in the future we will build our own. Around the time we were doing this, GitHub had just written their own code search engine.
Interesting.
And they were using Elasticsearch before, so we read through their old blog posts on how they ran their cluster, and why they built a new thing and how that works. So if that becomes available, we'll certainly use it, or something like it. But there are some interesting technical challenges still. Probably the most interesting is the indexing challenges we face, just like getting all of this data. It's kind of a data pipeline problem, right? So getting all of that data into the Elasticsearch cluster was just various challenges of scale associated with that.
So it doesn't sound like you had much of a hard time implementing this.
So there were some. It was kind of a 0 to 1 project in some ways, right? Like there was no search, and now there is.
Yeah.
So with 0 to 1 projects, your challenges are usually figuring out what to do.
Yeah.
Right. So we needed to figure out, okay, which search engine are we going to use? Okay, what queries are we going to use? How are we going to rank the results? And how are we going to get the data in the engine?
Yeah.
And those questions are not necessarily hard, but you have to have confidence.
Yeah.
That you've made the right decision, so that when feedback comes in, you can actually understand it, you can address it.
Yeah.
So
would you call that like lock-in or tech debt? What would you call that kind of? It's just like
there may be tech debt or there may not be, right? Maybe you do it right, correctly right out of the gate, and I think we mostly did it correctly with this one. As I mentioned, I had to rewrite the pipelines that get the data into Elasticsearch several times. And that was just because I wrote something and I was like, this really isn't that good and it has all these problems. And so I thought maybe I'll take a different approach.
Yeah.
We switched, I think the 5 times were like a Go script running on my computer, and then data flow using Java, data flow using Python, and then Databricks using Java, and then Databricks using Python or something like that. Anyway, there were a couple data flow ones, and then we were running into these issues with
those sound hairy to
with
me.
The cost kind of ballooning out of control.
Is relying on a third-party service.
Well, it was just more about, because we still are. So Databricks is still a third-party service.
Gotcha.
It runs Spark is the framework that it runs, and but it runs on a fixed cluster size, and Dataflow has this ability to just kind of balloon in size, and it was still really slow for various reasons related to how the pipeline is structured and where the data was stored, right? So all of our REPL files are stored in Google Cloud Storage, and there's just certain limitations, like listing out the files takes a really long time, and like them being all separate files means you have to do a separate request for each one. Some of that's parallelizable, some of it's not.
Interesting.
And so there are various bottlenecks there.
Wow. Well, cool. That is a great, what'd you call that? 10,000 feet, maybe 15,000 feet overview of search and the trajectory of your thought. Thank you, Lincoln.
Thank you.
And then if you see us in the Ask Forum, or you want to learn anything about platform, this guy is an absolute wizard. Hit him up on Replit. Thank you.
I've had community members reach out to me on Slack before. Which is a kind of a shocking experience at first, but I welcome it. I think it's fun.
Yeah, cool. Open arms. Thank you guys.